Hi, this is Karen. Can you believe that we are already beginning week 4? That seems just crazy. But here we are. And last week we spent a good deal of our time with literature maps. So I'm just going to revisit that and talk about the maps that a little bit about the maps that you all did. Just to be clear, we have not yet gotten to purpose statements, and so it's very permissible to use a topic as the top piece. So let's just take a look at one of the maps, and this map does start with a purpose statement. The purpose is a good guide for the entire study. As a matter of fact, I often refer to the purpose as the compass of the study. So for this particular map, the student is interested in, well, let's just read her purpose. The purpose of this case study, notice she names the study, is to understand the experiences of Latter-day Saint lay teachers in a local congregation with the introduction of a new teacher training program that is based on teacher collaboration meetings. So she's named a lot of the important concepts that are included in her study. She lists them then as the topical areas that will be of primary interest, so they become her literature streams. So look at this. We've got one that is religious education. Now we could just start with church education or with the LDS church education. She's decided to go broader and start with religious education, Christian teaching tradition, LDS context. So notice how she narrows. What we're talking about here is using kind of a V concept so that we go from general to specific. And that's a very good way of doing that. We want to use our literature map as an outline or guide for writing up our literature review. So in each case, we're going to look at a stream. Constructivism is the lens, that her theoretical lens that she's going to use that will help the reader understand the way in which she is looking at her topic. She's using constructivism, which is a theory of adult learning, as her lens. She's narrowing to experiential learning. She's also talking about, and these really are more parallel than they are going from general to specific, although it could be. Reflective practice is a type of experiential learning. Experiential learning nests nicely in constructivism, and facilitating is a specific type or a way of using reflective practice. So it can easily be looked at here as going general to specific. Teacher collaboration is a major topic or stream of her investigation. And she's very interested in professional learning communities, collective reflection within those communities, and then she's got a particular resource. We want to give each of our subtopics resources, tag them with resources that we would use, because that will also help us with the write-up, won't it? So this is really the way that we want to use our literature maps. We want our maps to guide the construction of our literature review and to be fully laying out what we say is our investigation, as we describe it by, even more than a topic, we describe it by our purpose. All right. So that then brings us to our framework. And really understanding which paradigm is of most importance to us. The literature map we just looked at was case study. Case study finds itself in the qualitative tradition or qualitative paradigm. We really have two paradigms, qualitative and quantitative. We also talk in terms of mixed methods, but we're really then mixing the qualitative with the quantitative or the other way around. And in this particular course, we're not going to use mixed method. The reason we're not is because really that's doing two studies. And for your master's, it's not necessary for you to do two studies in order to demonstrate that you understand how to conduct research. And that's really the reason that we have the research piece at all in the master's program, is so that you can demonstrate that you understand how to conduct research. So we want to do this in an expeditious manner. You do want to graduate, and we want that to happen as soon as possible, correct? So we're not going to do a mixed method. That doesn't mean that you can't add in a quantitative survey, that you can't add a couple of open-ended questions that would be asking people what else they would like to have the researcher understand about the topic, or give their opinion about how things are going in their work area if that's of interest to us. That's fine. That's just adding a very small qual piece to the quantitative study. That's not a mixed method. That's not doing interviews and collecting interview data, which would be qualitative, and having that alongside the quantitative, which would be the survey. That can be done. It simply is doing two research studies when you really, for the purposes of your master's, only need to do one. All right, so let's take a look at this week. So we are going to be looking at proposal formats. By that I mean we've got a template for the quantitative and a template for the qualitative. And we're going to walk through what each of those paradigms is like, and what each expects, and what makes quantitative with regard to measurement scales, with regard to the validity and reliability expected of the instruments, etc. And then we're going to look at qualitative, and we'll look at the instruments and the participant selection in a very different way. So we move to our readings for this time, and particularly looking at the qual and quant outlines. We're going to just spend a couple minutes walking through those today, so that I can kind of point out a couple of things that are different in each of them. You can find your qualitative and quantitative outlines in your Week 4 resources today. So those are listed in your Week 4 resources. So if you go into the resources, here they are. So let's just go ahead and get those. We'll start out with quantitative because, as it turns out, most people understand quantitative a lot more easily than they understand qualitative. So I'm just going to walk through real easily, real fast, with what these two paradigms are. The nomenclature is chapter 1, 2, and 3 for the proposal if we're conducting a thesis, and we may have one or two people interested in a thesis, or section 1, 2, 3, and 4. Section 1 being the introduction, section 2 being the literature review, and section 3 being methodology. Particularly, we call it methodology when we are in a quantitative paradigm. Qualitative refers to procedures. We're going to only discuss two methods for the purposes of this particular course in order for us to focus. There are lots of different quantitative and lots of different qualitative methods, but we're just going to focus on two. The quantitative method we're going to take a look at is survey, because it's often done in organizations, and we're going to look at case study that is also done in organizations quite often as our qualitative method. So let's look at both similarities and differences. A similarity we will find is that we want to, just as we were looking at in our literature review, concept 1 or stream 1, concept 2 or stream 2, and we want to describe both, and there could be easily a stream 3 or 4 in the extant literature on the topic. Again, we want to use that V concept, general to specific, but we also want to point out what in the literature review is there and what's missing. So as we go through the concepts, that's the way we will describe them. Because what we want to do is come to the gap in the study. We want to conclude and lead the reader to what we do not yet know. The problem, the need, the opportunity for this study, which we refer to as the gap of the study. And that will also help us to frame our problem statement. So our problem statement is next. And we want to actually state it. You probably have noticed that as you look at the literature, so often we find that people do not actually address the problem. They may list a litany of possible problems, and we're not actually clear on which one that researcher and that study addressed. We want to help our reader out by naming the problem and actually stating, so please take a note and do this, we want to begin our problem statement, and it's a statement and not a question. That means it ends with a period and is a declarative statement. The problem to be addressed by this study is, and then we'll state what that opportunity, need, or gap is for our particular study. That should lead us directly to the purpose. It is quite possible for a single problem to be addressed in multiple ways, which would be the purpose, the approach to the study. Cresswell, one of our texts, of course, has both qualitative and quantitative templates that are really great for crafting our purpose statement. The purpose, we also want to name the purpose in the same way. The purpose of this, name the tradition or name the method. So the purpose of this survey study or the purpose of this case study is, and then we go through and utilize Cresswell's template. Then we want to discuss that theoretical perspective. And remember that the literature review that literature map that we just looked at used constructivism as the theoretical perspective. Now, theory is used differently in whether we're doing a quantitative study or a qualitative study. In a quantitative study, we want to build on other literature, other theory that is out there. So we want to probably identify some theory that we probably are going to build upon and expand or somehow enrich. So one of the objectives then of qualitative research is to confirm, to disconfirm, or to extend theory in the extant literature. When we're and that's typical for basic research. It's less typical for research that we would do in organizations, because our research is more practical. Our research is more aimed at solving a problem in our particular organization. So we may not be expanding upon theory, but we still are going to have a theoretical lens. We're still going to have some theory that is often utilized in our discipline, And you'll find that as you go through the literature. You'll find discussion about certain theories. So that's where you're going to arrive at what theoretical perspective you will use. Then we would name our research questions. And when we're talking about the questions for quant, then we'll have multiple questions. You can also have hypotheses. We'll discuss these in a future week, in a future not lecture but discussion. We're going to both in the qual and quant define our terms, especially if we use jargon, and most of us do in our organizations. And we're going to talk about the limitations and delimitations. Limitations of our study are shortcomings, and there are inherent shortcomings in survey and inherent shortcomings in case, so you will discuss those, but you will also discuss the limitations that you impose. And by that, you impose things like limitations like you're going to restrict your study to only one group of individuals if it's a backyard study, and those might be people in your organization, or only one organization, or only one state, the state of Idaho. So those would be limitations. You could expand your study and make it more generalizable in the quantitative paradigm, or there might be limits on your instrument and its validity or reliability. Delimitations are the criteria that you select for your study. They're the fence around your study, that your individuals may need to have been full-time individuals for at least 1 year, that your system that you're exploring needs to have been in place for 1 year, or you might have only this part of the system and not another part of the system. So you're talking about inclusionary and exclusionary. So that's very important, the fence around the study. Then we're going to have a tie from a transition in your summary from your Chapter 1 or Section 1 to Chapter 2 or Section 2. We're moving to our literature review, and I've got an example here that shows you that we're going to talk about our search engines and search terms, and then we're going to use that V concept, and then we're moving on to our methods section. In the methods section for a quant, we're going to talk about our participants and our data collection in participants in a very different way than we will in qualitative. In quant, we talk in terms of a population. All of the people who are welders, all of the people who are church educators, all of the people who are engineers or nuclear engineers or nuclear reactor operators. But then the sample, only the specific nuclear reactor operators who are testing would be our sample, and only the people who actually participate in the survey would be our participants. So we discussed data collection, administering our instruments, etc., etc., and then what the instruments are. What are the variables? What are the materials? What constitutes instrument validity? It might be face validity or content validity. And how often has it been used? If there's reliability that's been established, then we would say so. If not, we would also say so. If you constructed your instrument, it doesn't have any reliability, really. Unless you constructed it on another instrument and just modified it from an instrument that does have an established reliability. Okay, then we're going to talk very lightly about our data analysis procedures. We might talk about that we're going to analyze with measures of central tendency, for example, which is usual in a survey study. Any anticipated ethical issues, any preliminary study that you've done, significance that you believe for the study, the so what of your study. What will we get from doing this study? And then any anticipated timeline. And so that is getting us our quantitative. Let's very briefly look at qual. So qualitative, the differences are, it's the same with our concepts or streams, same with our problem and purpose, only the qualitative template is a very different template from the quantitative. We will have a theoretical perspective, and this time, rather than building on an established theory, that we are going to use a theory as our lens. We might be using constructivism, or we might be using self-directed learning, or we might be using transformational learning, any number of different lenses that will contribute to how we view this particular study. We're only going to have one research question in a qual study. We refer to it as a grand tour question. So we'll talk again more about this as we get closer to talking about qual and quant. Define terms, limitations, delimitations, significance, and we'll also have a summary that transitions. Literature review is just the same. No differences in our literature review from qual to quant. Moving to our chapter or section 3 procedures, the characteristics of qualitative research and describing our research strategy will be a little bit different. But then we come to a section that we refer to as role of the researcher. Here is where you define who you are in the study. If, for example, you are a nuclear reactor operator studying nuclear reactor operator testing, you need to say that you're a nuclear reactor operator if this is a case study. Not so if it is a quantitative study and you're just conducting a survey. In quantitative paradigm, there is an assumption that you are removing bias and that it is a very objective study. In qualitative, there is a perspective that bias is embraced, that there will always be bias, and you simply need to let your researcher know what your biases are. And here's where you do that in your role of the researcher. Data collection procedures, data analysis procedures, and the strategy for verifying the findings. You also want to talk about any anticipated ethical issues and anticipated study timeline. So the ethical issues, as we go, where one of the things that we're doing for week 4 is the city behavioral training program, and it is the basic training that we want to do and provide for this week. Basic training, approximately 20 modules. It's not the refresher, which is only going to have about 12 modules. All right. So that's what we're doing for week 4. You can turn in your city certificate here, and you can sign up for your midterm conversation here. I do have a number of people who have already signed up for an opportunity to talk, and we're talking about a 30-minute, it can go longer, I've blocked off an hour, so you can talk, we can have our conversation extend longer than that, but 30 minutes is all we actually probably need for most of us. If those dates that I have don't work for you, then just email me and let me know, and we'll determine another date. And we can do this as a Skype, as a FaceTime, as a just telephone conversation, or in person. Depends on how you'd like to do it, and we can just make this happen in a good way for you. The objective here for the midterm conversation is for us to really hone in on your topic, so that if you'd like some help developing the problem and purpose, we can do that. If you'd like to talk about literature streams, then we can do that. It's really a way for you and I to have a conversation about your topic to just ensure that you feel comfortable with your direction and that we individually have had an opportunity for that conversation. All right, great. Let's get started in week 4.